Welcome back to Flipped Biology. Today, taking a look at the respiratory system. We're going to be beginning a unit here where we learn about the respiratory system and the excretory system. And as we take a look at some of the components in the textbook, you're going to find that these two systems are covered in the same chapter. This isn't we're pushed up against the end of the year, so we need to condense a few things and get it taken care of. There's a specific reason why we talk about the respiratory system and the excretory system at the same time, or at least in the same unit. And it's not that they're connected physically. There isn't some special tube that links your lungs and your kidneys together, but the purposes behind these two systems are essentially the same. The themes, at least, are in common between these two systems. And it's not going to be a part of your notes that we're going to give you. We're not going to flat out say, the connection between these two systems is, or the reason why we covered both of these systems at the same time is. Instead, we want you to be thinking through, what are these themes? What do the respiratory system and excretory system have in common? Again, it's not a physical part. It's not an organ. It's not a part of the body, but it's a theme in how these two systems work, or at least the purposes behind these two systems. We're going to be looking at just a small portion of the notes today. There's not a lot to cover in terms of parts. A lot of the different things about how they work we'll be putting together in class as we do different lab activities. So at least for this presentation, there's not going to be that much to it. And you have a diagram in your notes that's going to show you all the different parts. I believe they're numbered 1 through 15. And we're going to use that diagram. We'll flip back and forth between that diagram and the chart that you have that lists those parts in that same order and then gives us a description that you'll jot down. First, though, purposes of the respiratory system. The first purpose is to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. And as we learn about these different systems, they are often closely connected with others. It's hard to do the breathing without having some ability to move the oxygen to cells that need it. And so this respiratory system is indeed closely connected with your circulatory system. As we learned about pulmonary arteries to bring blood to the lungs and pulmonary veins to bring that blood that's picked up oxygen back to the lungs. Again, a close connection. The other is to convert monosaccharides to usable energy, and this requires oxygen. We're taking a look at a Cheeto here, and we're going to give you a demonstration in class, or at least a video demonstration, of how much energy is present in one single Cheeto. And we're going to take a look at how the body uses oxygen to break down that sugar into a form of energy that our bodies can use. There's a heck of a lot of heat being given off by just one single Cheeto. To burn that Cheeto requires oxygen. How does our body use oxygen to get the energy out of sugar and convert that to a usable form? That'll be something we deal with in a second presentation. Today, though, simply about the parts. And I'm going to put that summary video at the website. This summary video gives you a general idea about the purpose, so you can take a look at that. Here, though, taking a look at all those parts, 1 through 15, and the first place that we discuss here would be the nostrils. The nostrils, real simply put, where air enters the respiratory system. And certainly we can breathe through your mouth, but the nostrils and then next the nasal passage provide a lot of benefit. The benefit of breathing through your nose is that it filters the air. There's nose hairs that help to filter out dust and mold and bacteria and viruses. It also helps to warm the air and moisten it. As we learn later on, it'll be important for that air to be warm and moist for it to be able to diffuse across the lungs into the circulatory system. If it's cold, if it's dry, that diffusion isn't going to happen that rapidly. Number 3 is the pharynx. The pharynx is just the back of the throat. Not much more to say about it. It's where the nasal passages and the air from your mouth kind of meet up. Number 4, we touched on this ever so slightly back in the last unit when we learned about the digestive system. We said that the food needs to be directed towards the esophagus. The epiglottis is a covering, a flap that covers the trachea, and when you breathe in, that epiglottis should be in an up position. So the epiglottis is right at the top of the trachea here, and as you breathe in, that epiglottis is open, and when you swallow, the epiglottis is closed to make sure the food goes down the esophagus instead. The glottis is an opening. So epi means about or on top of. The glottis is the opening to the trachea. It's really not an actual structure you can point to that is the glottis. It's just the open end at the top of the trachea. And here's another example. The epiglottis, this case, is in the open position, so air can be directed down into the trachea. And when you swallow, the epiglottis would be in the down position. The larynx is the voice box. And the video that you're going to see here is really kind of neat. It's involving a singer who's having a laryngoscopy. And this person who's singing, they're taking a look at the vocal cords. And if you've ever played a reed instrument, you know that those vocal cords, or at least the cords in the reed instrument, have to be moved further and closer apart to be able to change the pitch. To be able to get this picture, this singer has a tube inside her mouth, inside her throat, and these are the vocal cords here. And they're using a strobe light. So they're getting these pictures back, and the images are showing these vocal cords appearing to move in slow motion because of the strobe light. But as she changes her pitch, she's able to get different tones. I'll put this at the website so you can hear it too. But right now she's doing a low pitch, and the vocal cords are far apart. And she's going a little bit higher in pitch, and the vocal cords are closer together. And each time that she changes her pitch, the vocal cords are changing their distance between them. Kind of an odd picture to be looking at. It would be really odd too if you were trying to sing while having that tube down your throat. But you can see these vocal cords vibrating. And just imagine how long it takes for your body to figure out how to change those vocal cords so that you're no longer just shouting and screaming and crying and yelling, but that you're actually forming words. That's kind of a hard process to be able to figure out as a young child. Trachea, number 7, is a windpipe. It has rings of cartilage around it, and these rings help provide stability. If you imagine a simple rubber tube, you can squeeze on that tube. It's very much like the esophagus. But when you have rings of cartilage around it, now it's a very stable tube. You don't want to crush the trachea and keep it closed. You want to allow that trachea to stay open. The esophagus has peristalsis going on, and you can squeeze that esophagus and push that food down towards the stomach, but the airway has to stay open. Number 8, down here, now we're starting to break that trachea off into smaller subsections. And so we have the bronchus, the first division that takes place. We have a right bronchus and a left bronchus to go to the right lung and the left lung. And then we get down into further and further narrower pathways. The bronchial tubes, smaller divisions of the bronchus, so number 9. So here's the trachea, bronchus, bronchial tubes getting down in this area here. And then the next area we're going to be going into would be bronchioles, the smallest divisions of the bronchial tubes. Come back to this diagram in a second. Large tubes, bronchus, bronchial tubes, bronchioles. We're getting smaller and smaller pathways, and eventually getting down into dead ends called alveoli. Bronchioles, the smallest divisions, the alveoli, the dead end sacs, and these are very thin sacs. The reason why they're so thin is that this is where gas exchange takes place. And so we need to be able to get the oxygen out of the lungs into the blood supply, and CO2 that your cells have produced needs to get into the alveoli so you can exhale it, go in the other direction. And we need to figure out why oxygen is important and why the body produces CO2 at some point as well. Here's another diagram that shows the alveoli at the very end. Bronchioles up here, alveoli down here, and here's the capillaries from the the pulmonary arteries and then going back towards the pulmonary veins towards the heart. Capillaries, gas exchange from the blood to the lungs, really kind of hard to tell in the diagram that we're pointing at a capillary versus an alveoli. But attached to the alveoli, we would find capillaries. Again, great picture. And then the diaphragm. I'll show you in class how the diaphragm is used to help you breathe. The diaphragm is a muscle below the lungs that helps with breathing. So right here, and you're going to see when we do the rat dissection that it's a big circular muscle at the bottom of the rib cage. Here's the diaphragm down here. Trachea, bronchus. Number 14, the esophagus. Remember, not part of the respiratory system, the tube from the mouth to the stomach. And then surrounding the lungs is something called the pleural membrane. Different spelling on plural, so not like many, but plural referring to the lungs. And you can imagine your lungs as like a sponge. And if you pour water into the sponge, eventually that water is going to leak out. The pleural membrane acts as like a saran wrap that surrounds the lungs or surrounds the sponge and would keep the air inside the lungs so that you have a better chance of absorbing it. If somebody gets into an accident and has that pleural membrane damaged, if they were to get stabbed or if they were to be shot or be in an accident where the pleural membrane has been damaged, every time they breathe in, that air just rushes right through their nasal passages down into the lungs, and if it was damaged here, leaking right on out. There's no way to keep the air inside the lungs, and as a result, as much as they breathe, they're losing the oxygen and they would end up suffocating. So the pleural membrane makes sure that the air stays in the lungs, and then you can exhale the air back out your mouth or nose. There's a second video that I'd like you to take a look at and a parts summary video that I'd like you to see as well. There are a couple questions that go along with this, but really everything else we'll be doing together in class. Have a great day.